Hey guys, welcome back to Fantasy Tips. My name is Julian, and we're finally starting our series of episodes where we talk about each individual NHL team and we break down their lineup and all their noteworthy players and whether I think you should consider drafting those players. Now, we start always in alphabetical order, so we start with the Anaheim Ducks. And the Anaheim Ducks have an interesting team this year. They got better. They got John Klingberg, and their younger guys are getting older and more experienced, so they should only get better and better. One last thing before we get started, guys. Anaheim has a really favorable schedule this year. In their schedule, they play a tired team who played the night before 19 times while they are actually fully rested. On the flip side, they are only the tired team who's playing against a well-rested team 8 times this year. So out of every single team in the NHL, in that regards, they have the absolute best schedule. So a lot of those games should end up as wins, which gives Gibson a nice little bit of extra value this year and gives some of their other guys a little extra value too because they are playing against a tired team. To put this in perspective, guys, the next closest team who's playing the most amount of games against a tired team while they're rested is Seattle with 14. Compared to 19, that's a pretty big gap, and Anaheim definitely does have a little bit of an advantage this year just because of their schedule. Now, before we get started though, guys, please leave a like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. I'm going to be posting a whole lot of preseason content for you guys, so if you do want notifications every time I post a new video, guys, hit that notification bell, and you'll get notified every single time I post a new video, and that should help you a lot for your drafts. All right, let's jump into the content now, guys, and let's start with the Anaheim Ducks lines. So on the top line, I project Mason McTavish, Trevor Zegras, and Troy Terry. That would be a freaking electric line if that were to actually come to fruition. And I think Zegras and Terry are primed for really good seasons. Last year, they had really solid seasons to begin with, and that was just Zegras' rookie year. So things can only get better from here, and McTavish is another young electric player that could potentially have a really solid season this year if he's given the right deployment, and this would be the right deployment. On the second line, I project Henrique, Strome, and Comtois, and on the third line, I project Vatrano, Lundstrom, and Silfverberg. On defense, we have Fowler, Drysdale, Vatrano, Klingberg, Benoit, and Shattenkirk. Now let's move on to the highest ranked player on the Ducks, and that is Trevor Zegras. Last year, he had a really solid year with 61 points in 75 games. His shooting percentage wasn't too inflated, and this was Zegras' rookie season, which is absolutely fantastic. The dude had a great year. 61 points in a rookie year is just really, really good, and things can only get better for Trevor Zegras. He'll probably play on a line again with Troy Terry, and if that's the case, they're going to both have really good years. Last year, he ended up finishing as the 140th best fantasy player. He's ranked at 101. So I don't think it's a steal where he's currently ranked or anything like that. But I don't think it's a bad ranking either because Trevor Zegras can only get better from here. And I think that he's going to have a really good year with the Ducks, and the Ducks are a better team this year too. So that plus minus, that really bad plus minus he had last year, that minus 21, that can only go up because the Ducks are not going to be that bad of a team this year. And then Troy Terry, same kind of thing, right? Last year he had 67 points, which was absolutely amazing. Huge breakout year for Troy Terry. His shooting percentage, though, was a little bit inflated. So I don't think he's going to shoot again at 19%. Not a lot of guys can sustain that kind of shooting percentage. However, I do still see him having a really good year. Last year, he ended the season as the 107th best fantasy player, is now ranked 139. So even if he does regress a tiny bit, well, he's still, ranked pretty well considering how he finished last year. Also, same thing for him. He's not going to be as much of a minus player as he was last year. He was a minus 11 last year, and the Ducks are going to be a better team, so he shouldn't finish too far into the negatives at all this year. So I do think Troy Terry is pretty decent value at this range. And then we have John Klingberg, ranked 161, had a pretty abysmal year last year with only 47 points in 74 games, finished as the 64th best defenseman overall, which is really not good for John Klingberg's standards. Now, he was also a minus 28 on Dallas, which is a pretty good team, so that's a little concerning. So I don't think he's going to have that great of a plus-minus on Anaheim. He's never been a super great defensive player, but I do think Anaheim is going to lock him into that PP1 position. And I think he's going to stick there. And I think that PP1 can only get better with the development of the young guys like Zegras and Terry and McTavish. So I do think that he definitely does have some value on that top power play. Am I crazy high on him at this range? No, but I think he's pretty decent value at this range. Now, he's also going to get dealt at the deadline, barring the Ducks making some kind of miraculous playoff push, and I don't think they're going to make the playoffs. Not a lot of people think they're going to make the playoffs this year, and honestly, they shouldn't. So as long as they don't, Klingberg is going to be traded at the deadline. So that makes it a little bit even more risky to draft him, because if he is traded at the deadline, his value is going to either go up or down. And a lot of playoff teams already have their defenseman number 1 set. So if he's dealt at the deadline, he's not necessarily gaining value. So it is a little bit riskier to draft John Klingberg, but I don't think it's necessarily a terrible draft pick. And obviously, if he's doing well, you can actually trade him in your fantasy league, because if you're worried about him being dealt to a team that he's not going to play as well for, well, you can trade him for someone who's actually going to have value for the rest of the year. Then at number 181, and the final ranked Anaheim Ducks player on the list, is John Gibson. And last year, he had a pretty bad year with only 18 wins in 56 games started. I still think Gibson is one of the best goalies in the league. And with the Ducks getting better this year, they're not going to be a playoff team, like I said, but they will win a lot more games than they did last year. So Gibson, I think, is in a really good spot here, and at 181, he's going pretty late and could be a pretty big steal. Stolarz is one of my favorite backups in the league. I think he's super underrated as a backup. I think he's a pretty good goalie, but the thing is, Gibson is still going to be the starter in Anaheim. He's going to get the vast majority of the starts in Anaheim. And I think that he's going to be of pretty good value for anyone that drafts him in this range or later. And then I have Drysdale and Cam Fowler, and I don't think either of these guys have a crazy amount of value this year. I was kind of on the fence with Cam Fowler, but then they signed Klingberg. So Cam Fowler, he had a solid year last year with 42 points and put up some, pretty respectable peripherals as well. So he was getting a safe-ish floor every night, but Cam Fowler, I think he's a good pick if you're really late in the draft, in a pretty deep draft. I think he's going to have a pretty decent year. But Drysdale, I don't see him having too great of a year this year. Obviously, he was really bad with the plus-minus last year, and I just don't see him having that kind of breakout year with Klingberg on the roster. He's not going to get that power play one time. So I'm not going to draft Drysdale, and I'll only draft Fowler in super, super deep leagues towards the end of the draft. Moving on to Mason McTavish, and I have him projected on the top line. I think he plays at least on the second line with Ryan Strome, so I think he's going to have a pretty solid opportunity. Could even see power play one time, and if he does, and he's not ranked in the top 250 players, but if he does get that kind of opportunity, he's going to potentially have a really solid year. I don't mind drafting him at all really late in draft, considering how late he's projected to go in drafts right now. I kind of think it's a nice steal. I think he's one of the favorites for the Calder Trophy this year. And then I have Ryan Strome, and last year he had a pretty good year. He ended up with 54 points in 74 games, was the 156th best fantasy player in the majority of leagues, and honestly, I don't see him doing as well this year, unfortunately. Last year he played on the line with Panarin and on the top power play with Panarin, Zibanejad, and Kreider on a really deadly Rangers power play. Now, even if he does play on the Ducks power play, it's not going to be nearly as deadly as that Rangers power play, and he's not playing on a line with Panarin. There's nobody on the Ducks that's as deadly as Panarin, unfortunately. So I don't see Strome doing as well this year, and I wouldn't draft him unless you're going really deep into a draft, and there's really nobody better of an option than Ryan Strome. I don't think he's going to have a terrible year, but I don't think he's going to have the kind of year that he did last year. And then I have Adam Henrique, who's perennially one of the most underrated players in the NHL. He's super underappreciated. The dude had a nice season last year with 42 points in 58 games. So while he was healthy, he did really, really well. And I project him being on that second line with Strome and with Comtois, but he could potentially even play on that top line with Zegras and with Troy Terry. That's actually where Daily Faceoff has him projected. So if he does end up playing there, he's going to have a decent amount of value. Now, Henrique was good all year last year, and he never went over 15% rostered, which is pretty crazy considering how he had a pretty solid season. I had him in a couple of my leagues, and he's putting up point per game pretty much while he was healthy. So Henrique is a good player, and he's not someone you necessarily have to draft. You can just wait till after your draft and see how he does, and if he's starting to put up these kinds of numbers again, you can definitely add him to your team. He's not going to be drafted in a lot of leagues, but if you're in an insanely deep league, I'm talking like 20 players, you can probably draft him. Moving on to Frank Vatrano, and last year he ended up with 32 points in 71 games, which is nothing too special, but he split the time between Florida and New York Rangers. And in New York, he did pretty good because he was playing on the top line with Zibanejad and with Kreider. In Florida, he wasn't really getting that much of an opportunity. That being said, in Anaheim, he's not going to be playing with studs like Zibanejad and Kreider, and I don't think he's going to get that big of an opportunity. At best, he's going to play on the second line, and I just don't see him, producing for fantasy this year. Unless there's a crazy amount of injuries in Anaheim, Vatrano has very minimal value, and I'm going to stay away from him. And then I have Max Comtois, and last year had a really abysmal year, which was pretty unfortunate because I like Max Comtois. I've always liked him as a prospect, and I think he has a nice, bright future in the NHL. But he's got to play better than he did last year. He only had 16 points in 52 games. He's got to play a lot better than that. Hopefully, he can stay healthy this year and show exactly what he can bring to the table. If he does well in training camp, he should be able to crack that second line like I have him projected with Strome and Henrique. And if he does play on that line, he has a tiny bit of fantasy value, especially if he does end up playing on the top power play as well. He's got a lot to prove this year, and if he can prove that and end up sticking on the second line, he could have a little bit of value in deeper leagues. And last but not least, I have Kevin Shattenkirk, and last year had 35 points in 82 games, had, a decent season, had a really good start to the year. A lot of people picked him up, but then he ended up being a drop in a lot of my following videos. I listed him as a drop quite a few times. He's not someone I'm super high on, especially with Klingberg being on the team. He's not going to get that power play time anymore. So Shattenkirk is just someone I'm going to be staying away from this year. And that's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching all the way through. Please leave a like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell if you want notifications for all of my preseason content. Trust me, guys, I'm going to be putting out a lot of solid content to help you prepare for your fantasy drafts. Until next time, guys, I'll catch you in the next episode of Fantasy Tipped.